You're listening to the For Climate Tech series on the Forward Faster podcast, providing bite-sized insights for climate tech innovators.
Hi, and welcome to NextCore's Forward Faster. I'm Chris Carpenter from the marketing team at NextCore, and with me today is Mike Riedlinger, Managing Director and Technology Commercialization for Scale for Climate Tech and the Manufacturing Accelerator. Thanks for joining me today, Mike.
Chris, glad to be here.
You recently were recognized an environmental leader by the Rochester Business Journal, so congrats.
Well, thank you.
Of course, yeah. And we all know you here at NextCore and the work you do, but can you kind of introduce yourself to our listeners and talk about the programs you hear and how they're kind of involved in the environmentalism work in Rochester?
Sure. So I have lived in Rochester for really all of my adult life. I went to Rochester Institute of Technology, got a bachelor's degree in fine art there, went to University of Rochester, a master's degree in business from U of R, and I'm proud to say I'm also an adjunct professor of entrepreneurship there. Over the years, I've worked for many entrepreneurial companies here in the Rochester area, a variety of different businesses, been involved in lots of different startups. I've had several startups myself, and that was actually a connection to NextCore. Some of the startups that I had were based within NextCore's facilities, both earlier one in Henrietta, as well as the work that I'm doing here. Also ran the BioVenture Center, which is in Henrietta for several years. NextCore was then called High Tech Rochester. So I've been engaged with the organization for quite a long time. Here specifically, I work on manufacturing-oriented programs to help people go from their earliest prototypes into something to be mass-produced, and it's really important inside of our Scale for Climate Tech program, as well as people that have other ideas where they want to mass-produce things using some of the area contract manufacturing capabilities, of which Rochester has lots of resources. To me, it's a good way to really build community, take advantage of a lot of the great assets that we have here, and build on sort of creative spirit that sort of is part of Rochester.
Very cool. So understanding that entrepreneurism has kind of been the arc of a lot of your career, kind of how has environmentalism intertwined in that? Because I know obviously like climate and all kinds of environmental issues are always a big problem to be solved. But it seems like you've kind of touched on a bunch of different environmental problems.
Sure. So I think the genesis of this goes back to when I was young. I grew up in central Illinois. The small town that I'm in has a very large coal-fired generating station. So right now it's still in operation. It's slated to be decommissioned in 2028. So it's going to be burning coal for a long time. And it's big. It's 1,700 megawatts.
Megawatts.
So it's been in operation since the late 1920s, primarily provides electrical power to the Chicago area. So we, in central Illinois, in the small town I'm in, we suffer all the ravages, the pollution, the coal ash that came from it when I was growing up. It's not quite so bad now, but still it's an enormous amount of coal that comes in by barge and train. So I think that early on that kind of informed my concerns, because the coal ash really would go to school. I was fortunate enough to have a car when I was in high school, which I really loved, but it would have a coating of fly ash on it just overnight from the coal plants that were nearby.
Wow.
So it was always a nuisance and a concern. Later, I got interested in photography, and I worked with a nature photographer that's reasonably well known to folks at least my age, Ansel Adams.
Oh, yeah.
So Ansel had also been president of Sierra Club, and the key connecting point was a real respect for nature, for the earth, to be part of it, to understand it, to interact, that we're literally creatures here on the earth with everything else. And it needs to be treated with respect. I think that's where all this, for me, really is kind of deeply rooted in.
It's cool. You have a lot of really interesting intersections kind of led you to, I don't know, it's cool. It's a unique path that you don't always hear. So the climate and environmental field is massive with countless ways to get involved. How and where have you chosen to focus your attention and efforts?
Well, here at NextCore, the focus really is on helping inventors, entrepreneurs take their innovations, but get them out to other people at scale. So the key to this is there are literally thousands of new things that need to be created to help reduce the emission of greenhouse gases as sort of the first priority. So do things that no longer really use fossil fuels that are key generators of greenhouse gases. The other is those things that can be done that help improve the overall climate. So things that relate to direct air capture, CO2 as an example, or things that help sequester carbon in other forms that will help reduce the amount of greenhouse gases in the environment. Much more challenging, by the way, than those things to displace fossil fuel. But there are literally thousands of things that we need. There's so many interrelationships across things. We need to get to a point where, for all of us, we can accomplish the things that we want to accomplish. So we all need tools. We all need energy of different forms to use in the things that we do. But it should be easy to access those things that aren't contributing to greenhouse gases. So I really want to help enable those people that have new ideas that are really worth bringing onto the market to be able to do it at scale. And I enjoy working with others here in our community, contract manufacturers in particular, because I consider a lot of the work that they do, especially early working with entrepreneurs to do design for manufacturing, to be more art. But it also connects with science, because you need to make things in the thousands that are very much identical one to another. So mass production.
Yeah. With intention, it seems like, is a key part of it, is like really intentional.
Right. Being thoughtful about what's being created. Absolutely.
Yeah. And high impact. That's just a kind of a waterfall effect. You've been in Rochester for a while now. Obviously, I know the coal ash in Illinois is very personal for you, but what threats do you think the Finger Lakes region faces with a changing climate?
Sure. So my wife and I, we also have a place in Watkins Glen that's right on Seneca Lake. So we're always sensitive to things that are going on there, because runoff from fields and farms that are nearby affects algal blooms in the lake. Always concerned about sort of the wildlife that surrounds the lake itself. I would say, things that we noticed, numbers of insects, the numbers of pests, sort of the way things are sort of changing in the many years that we've been there. We can actually see it. So these are effects that are going on from climate. The other thing that we experienced even, this particular weekend here in upstate New York, some areas get very heavy snowfall and other areas that didn't.
Mm-hmm.
I am a little bit concerned about Rochester. We've had it pretty good here for the past several winter seasons, but it's completely possible that we have a 4 or 5 foot snowfall in a weekend.
It feels totally random.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, this is the thing about climate change, right? It's literally change. Earlier this year, we had droughts throughout the state. So it didn't have the effects so markedly here as they did other parts of the state where they even had wildfires. There's so many more things that are going to happen that we otherwise just don't have in our sort of history of how things are going to be season to season. They'll be changing, but there's so many effects. There's effects on people's health. There's effects on the cost of different types of fuels. There's follow-on effects relative to access to different tools that people could use for home comfort.
Mm-hmm.
So there's many things that still need to be accomplished and dealt with.
Kind of flipping the script, and I was excited to ask you this question because I feel like you have a better grip on what is actually out there in terms of solutions across the state. So first I want to ask locally kind of what entrepreneurs or inventions or it can even be like innovative groups. It doesn't have to be a technology, but what have you seen that seems to be making an impact here locally in terms of environment?
Well, in terms of environment, I think there's a thing that we maybe take too much for granted is we live in an area that primarily gets its electrical energy from non-fossil fuel-based sources. So the Rochester region, much of Western New York, hydroelectric generation, nuclear power, wind generation, all are key energy sources for electricity. So downstate in New York City area, it's actually the reverse. So a lot of gas-fired plants are producing electricity in the New York City metro area. It happens that upstate New York is an ideal place to actually manufacture products so that the carbon that goes in the original product when it's created ends up being very low if there's hydroelectric, wind power, other sources of energy that are not fossil fuel based. So we live in a region actually that's very good for manufacturing that helps reduce greenhouse gas in our environment. Other things that are going on. So Rochester happens to be really rich in resources. A group that we work with a lot in the Scale for Climate Tech program is the Pollution Prevention Institute at RIT.
Yeah.
RIT also is home to the Center of Excellence for Advanced and Sustainable Manufacturing. So these are resources available primarily throughout the state, but to others anywhere in the world can use these resources. There's also the Remade Institute at RIT, which, the goal there is how do we provide some more circularity in products that are designed and made so that there are things that happen end of life rather than going into landfill. So there's so much activity that's actually focused on larger effects in the rest of the world, in our state, the rest of the world, to help improve our climate in total. So to those as being really promising spots.
Yeah, I mean, they're incredible resources, and I don't think they're talked about enough. And I think that segues well into kind of the larger question is, what solutions have you seen outside of the Finger Lakes in New York State region that you find really interesting?
There are companies that are working on doing carbon sequestration based on seawater, which I find really interesting. Changing the alkalinity of seawater changes the amount of CO2 that can be stored in seawater. So there are projects like that. We did have a company called Vicarb in our last Scale for Climate Tech cohort that's doing some of that work. So we'll see where that leads. But you need seawater, so it's a little bit different.
Still in New York, though.
New York does have coastline on the Atlantic, so.
They just had a pilot set up too, I think, by New Lab in Brooklyn.
Yes.
Pretty cool. I'm excited to see what comes of that. So, kind of now focusing kind of back on the Finger Lakes region, I'd be curious of what Rochester and the Finger Lakes region is doing well for addressing climate, and then kind of the flip. What can we be doing better on?
I think overall, we're doing well for using resources that we have here to help not only our immediate community in the Rochester area, but to connect with others. So the Venture for Climate Tech, Scale for Climate Tech programs, we're working with companies that are not only New York State based, but companies that can come into the state from anywhere in the world and do business here that makes a difference relative to greenhouse gas emissions. So I think that's thanks not only to a lot of the efforts that are here in the Western New York area, to NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, that's been a supporter of a lot of these programs that really deserves an enormous amount of gratitude and thanks for doing that, because it makes a difference well beyond the people that are here in the state relative to overall greenhouse gas reductions worldwide. Other things, I think that the general populace in the Rochester region is better informed about things that are related to environment and overall ecology than in other communities throughout the United States. Certainly there's some that are on par, but I think by and large, the populace around Rochester is just more aware of what's going on. And that's part of the mission that we do need to continue, is to continue with efforts in education and awareness of the activities that individually we engage in contributing to programs that help mitigate things that are presenting challenges in our environment. So those are areas I see.
Very cool. I like that. So part of me was throwing around topics that I think would be interesting just to get your 2 cents on, like with all of the manufacturing developments in Western New York. But I was curious of which of these projects excites you or concerns you too.
Well, if I take the sort of the question about technology in general and how things are sort of set to change here in Western New York.
Yeah.
So things like having the semiconductor corridor here and having the presence of Micron in Syracuse, that means that there's going to be much more activity relative to technology-related fields. So areas that we also are working in here at NextCore relate to workforce development. Semiconductors in particular, that they are used in lots of devices. They're used in lots of sensors that help in both monitoring and reducing emissions of greenhouse gases. So these are important things to be making, building, and building in volume for sure. So that's a good thing. But along with this goes people that are put to productive work that have opportunities for very good jobs. So one of the efforts that we do have here at NextCore is under a Department of Energy grant to help support developments in workforce, improvements relative to manufacturing, and also attracting new businesses that are in clean tech. So it'd be clean manufacturing. They don't necessarily have to be clean energy producers. But they would be businesses that are devoted to things that support clean energy. So there's initiative underway for that. There are many area businesses, manufacturers that have signed on. There are some new ones that are locating now into the city of Rochester. There are workforce development programs that are now in place to help support new business growth in Rochester. So I see all of this as being a real driver of both economic development for our region, but also gives rise to more of those products that we really do need for a future where we can reduce the volumes of greenhouse gases that are produced.
Thanks so much for sharing your story with us today, Mike. I really appreciate it.
No problem.
You can follow us for more episodes at Forward Faster at nextcore.org. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Mike, thanks again for joining us again.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, and we will see you all next time on the Forward Faster podcast.